Our next topic is the development trajectory of Sabah. So through the personal history, through the collective history, through naming the eras and the ages and the periods of our evolution, there was socio-economic and political development. So what we're going to do on this wall over here, in a way, is mirror that and trace it in terms of our development. When did we do what? Someone talk about crocodile skins being sold in Europe. We talked about different products from the forests, from the seas. We talked about merchants, all these things. We talked about logging, we talked about sawit, we talked about paddy. So there were themes here already. So I think what I want to do here is pull out those main themes and then let's plot it together. When did logging start? When did it, was it small scale and then became large scale? Same with agriculture. When did we plant rubber? When did we plant cocoa? When did we plant palm? When did oil palm come in? Who were the forces? When did the Chinese come? When did they, start all these enterprises? Again, it's not a history lesson. Similarly, it's also personal. It's your people, what your people did. And then let's map it out together. We sort of want to see, again, with the whole overview in mind, how did we get into this linear extractive economy that is our current or dominant economy? How did we move away from traditional economies? How did we move away from tamus and barter and all these things? And try to do it again without this is right or this is wrong, but this is just what happened. I think what we want to unpack here is, how did we get here? Forever Sabah was founded when we asked the question in 2011, 2012, where will Sabah be if we continue on this current trajectory of development? Where will we be in 50 years? And that's what led to Forever Sabah. Everyone thought about the question and said, oh, I think we need to disrupt that trajectory because it's not going to end up in a good place. And that's what led to the work that we do, all the programs, all the projects, all of you, all that you're focusing your lives on today started with that question. So imagine that was wherever, somewhere here, 2011, 12, whatever. So now let's kind of take steps back and see, how did we get there? And that's going to help us with our conversation tomorrow. For us to refresh our understanding of the circular economy. And where are we stuck in doing that? What are the powers that be that we need to address? How are we going to do it? And of course, not everything is going to be answered. It's a conversation, and we're taking a moment to have an overview of ourselves as well, our own work, our own projects, our systems. Okay, I didn't know if to draw a line. It can be a line, doesn't have to be a line. It can be eras. It can be a flow chart. Anyone has any ideas? Some of you are good drawers. If you see any images that come to mind, any symbols that come to mind, just come forward and go for it. Those of you online as well, we need you. Neville, can you talk about what you're writing?
Yeah. Dulu tidak banyak orang, and then ada abundance of natural resources, and dia cukuplah untuk semua orang dulu. Kalau back in the British punya documentations, they say endless supply. It's like it's never going to habis, all of this wealth that we have dulu. And then it helped people to make a living out of it. Ada yang bikin rumah. Dulu mana ada undang-undang, you can just cut any trees you want and make a livelihood out of it. For example, kalau in the East Coast, timber was critical to the development of large commercial fishing punya fleets, because people saw others were making more money, so they all pergi potong kayu, all bikin kapal, and there was no law to regulate any of this. But mostly people were subsistence, because no way for them to sell their whatever they catch. They just live off sustainably from that. But once you have, when colonialism started, then it was all about money. It was all about catching as much as you can, and like everyone competing for the resources. So we have so many fleets back in the day. This was the golden era of Sandakan, the East Coast, from the 50s probably all the way to the 80s.
Neville, do write keywords also.
Okay. So when our government want to start regulating this, they come up with top-down approach. They talk about protected area. They want to put a fence on all these resources. Then it created another problem lah. But on the side, on the other side lagi, all this large fleets dulu end up scooping everything out, and then there was no more, and then there was fish catches or prawns. Back in the day, it was like very high lah, in the 70s and to the 90s, but the prices is very low. And then in the 90s, all these ships beginning to not making the profits, and then a lot of this industry, a lot of these businesses collapsed. This one collapsed, and then everyone went back to using small boats again. So now we have many little small boats who are contributing to the sources of protein for the people back in the day. But then again, whatever laws that we have, whatever laws that was introduced by the British colony was only relevant during this era. And we are still using the same one into this next 50 years or even beyond 50 years. So that's the big problem right now lah. And what else? Now catches are down. People are catching less, but but also because there's too many smaller boats now, more small boats, and the issue that they've been facing is they don't have license. And then the government of the day because of their own punya subsidy system. Subsidy system there is overwhelmed. They don't want to give any more people issue more license, because more and more fishermen are going to demand for more subsidies. So hundreds and hundreds of millions are spent more and more and more and more and more and more and more as we go by. For instance, a few years ago, fishing subsidies was like close to 200 million. And then if the government recognize all the rights of more of these people, increasingly more and more people are relying on the sea as a livelihood, then it's, this means that we need a reset lah. And then access to these resources also is ada gates sudah. This is gated sudah, this reset, and then you have many laws written, blah 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 blah, after another law, but there's never an effort to look at reset, reform. So far for me itulah kalau pasal fishing. They could be more, but I'll just stop here lah.
Hi, Casey here. I sorry, I don't know much about history, and I try to read up. But I found a paper recently, very interesting. It's written by a professor of history, and let me share some facts coming from me. So it's by also I checked this person's background, and then I found that I think he knows what he's talking about. He's a professor of history, and then he did a study on Chinese in Sabah specifically. And his view is quite interesting in the sense that he felt that the British brought in Chinese in sometime like 1846, but mostly because they brought them in, mostly because they wanted a model of Singapore. They wanted a population that is enterprising, doing business, so that they can collect tax. That's the model of how the British work. They feel that if there's no businesses, no town and all that, they cannot collect tax. And when they cannot collect tax, it cannot fund the government. And then another interesting thing is that not only they can collect tax, the Chinese are also quite terrible with vices. They gamble, they take opium and all that. And again, that provides revenue to the British. Okay, I can send this paper and you can have a look. And something, I won't go through this whole paper. There's something that this paper also highlighted was that, which interests me a great deal, because in Sagama, tobacco was once a very important industry. Apparently, during the early years of the British, no agricultural crop was successful except tobacco. Tobacco was very, very, very successful. You get a lot of investment from the British, from the Germans and all that. So tobacco was the main driving force in agriculture at the time. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Can you put opium there also?
So I speak as a British. The the British for something like 60 years, I think, had a policy where they forced Indians to grow opium, and they forced Chinese societies to be open to opium. And the purpose was to addict Chinese to opium and to use that to generate revenue in these settlements like in Sabah, but also to keep China open for trade. So this is a long and very nasty piece of imperial history in which my family was campaigning against it. at that time, but it lasted for a very, very long time. It was not an accident. It was a policy. And it was very hard to stop. So
One of his ancestors was part of stopping it or helping to stop it.
But I asked my laki, and then dia punya ancestry dari kepulauan di Filipina. Di situ kerja dorang tangkap apa kuda liar. Ya, tangkap kuda liar begitu, and then dorang migrate pergi Sabah. Dia punya bapak, my laki punya bapak, dia migrate pergi Sabah, and then di situ dia kerja balak. And then tahu after like few years kerja balak, mungkin reason politik, macam perubahan politik, dia suspek, and then after balak dia jadi nelayan, disendakan laut dalam. Enggak, pesisir laut kan.
Banyak yang membalap aku dekat.
Itu sejalah.
Thank you. Thanks, Kamir. Chinese migrant labor.
Oh yeah, something very interesting also I forgot to mention. Sabah is the only part in Southeast Asia where the northern Chinese came, but they could not tahan the environment, and then all of them quit. Northern Chinese people, their surname is not like the normal Wong, Tan and all that. They are like Fang, Dong, and very, very Mandarin kind of name. But they went back, they could not tahan. So it's the only place they came and tried that cannot tahan.
What do you mean they cannot tahan? What they do?
These are northern Chinese. These are cold weather Chinese.
I know,
These
but
are
what
people-
did they do? What did they do? They went back. They jump in the sea. What did they do?
I think they went back. They ran back according to that paper.
Borrowing from that process earlier. In a way, a lot of what happened there manifested in some kind of developmental journey. Yeah. So building of schools, building of churches, building of roads, and all these things. So think about that as well.
I'm listening to all these stories about what was happening locally and how important those stories are, how rich they are. But then I was thinking, what is it that I can contribute as somebody not from here? And I was thinking about maybe something about the bigger political economic context in each era that shaped what happened locally. So that connect the big things you saw here with the economy. So we start with the 18th, 19th centuries. This is before colonization. The biggest thing that was, you had your subsistence economies, but the biggest thing that was shaping the economy of Sabah was the relationship between China and Europe. I know this is a surprise. It was a surprise to me when I read about it also. It's one of Cynthia's favorite books. Europe needed a lot of things from China. China needed nothing from Europe. So the European enterprise had to make a huge effort to find things that China needed. Where did it find things that China needed? It found them in the seas and forests of Borneo, Sulawesi, all those places. These were things Chinese needed, like birds' nests, tripang, all of these things. But you don't make those in Europe. So Europe put its effort on trying to get control of the trade to China of these forest and coastal products in Southeast Asia. And the way it did that was it found middlemen. It found local traders to do this. And most of those traders were people like the Suluks. So the British was able to get money from the Chinese so they could bring the things they wanted from China by encouraging the local trade. And that's how all, particularly the eastern side of Borneo, got so involved in producing all those things to sell to China. But what happened was that the middlemen that the British were creating got richer and richer and more powerful. And they moved from trading to slaving, to controlling the people to do that. So that whole rise of the strength of the Sulu Sultanate and these other things and all that slaving was the consequence of British, mainly British, but other European economic necessity of how to deal with China. So very interesting way to understand that type of slavery. Then you had the North Borneo Chartered Company with their CEO. Now, probably in school, you were told you were colonized by the British, but not true. You were not colonized by the British. You had a CEO. This CEO their job was to make money from North Borneo, of course, for their shareholders. To be very quick, the main way they shaped Borneo was this. They did not have enough capital to develop Borneo. They had some, they wasted it all on mega projects. They had their own Trans-Borneo highway and railway, and they wasted all that money. They didn't have any money after that. So the only way they could make money was to bring Chinese and tax the Chinese. And that's why Borneo had economic stagnation. They tried one after another cash crop agriculture. And as Casey said, only one of them made money, and that was for a short time. That was tobacco, because they didn't invest enough in it. Her great-grandfather's, I don't know what would you call him, William Pryor, who you saw, you put him on this thing here. William Pryor was one of those administrators. He tried everything to get the company to invest properly in conditions for commercial agriculture, but the company failed to do that well. So you had economic stagnation. They lived from taxing the Chinese. That was the economy of North Borneo, was to tax the Chinese to make money for wealthy people in London. Then along came the Japanese. So if the Second World War was the war between the industrial countries that had colonies and the industrial countries that did not have colonies, that was the Second World War. All those with colonies on one side, those with no colonies on the other side. So that's why Japan and Germany were united. Japan was pushed into the Second World War because the Europeans and the Americans were denying them access to raw materials and oil. I think it was in 1936, they stopped that. So what the problem that Japan had was that industrialization was being stopped. They wanted access to raw materials, but the Europeans were keeping them inside their colonies and saying you can't have. Inside Japan, the problem was the military was too strong and the civilian was too weak. So the army could see it's easy to defeat these Europeans. They're useless. But the civilians were not strong enough to say, you'll defeat them, but what about tomorrow? What you do afterwards? But the army's idea was that we defeat the Europeans, we create, what did they call it? The Asian Free Trade something zone. Not that word language, I forgot the name, but they had a word for it. They wanted to have free trade among free Asian nations. That was their idea. And they thought this would be such a good idea that the Europeans and Americans would not come back again to fight them for it. They didn't have a plan, basically. And their economy was so small, they couldn't support the military that the Americans could support. But that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to open free trade from Borneo, which had been stuck in monopoly capitalism with no investment money. The Japanese knew a lot about North Borneo. They were one of the few groups who invested in North Borneo, especially in the Tarawa area. They knew how much economy there could be in Borneo if you actually had a modern economy, not this ancient British private company. Anyway, all that trade failed because they hadn't thought about air power. As soon as they moved a boat, the Americans or the British bombed it. That's why Borneo went into starvation, because even by the Second World War, Borneo already imported most of its rice, was not growing its rice, because the North Borneo Chartered Company never built roads. It was cheaper to bring rice from Vietnam than to build a road from the coast to where people were growing rice, to bring rice from inside. So that was the Japanese history. A good idea, completely failed because military error, ending, of course, in collapse. Then along came the British. The most colonization of the British was to make money, but not in North Borneo. In North Borneo, the British had three simple aims. One was, the most important one, control the expansion of communism from China and Southeast Asia. Number two, control the freedom movement that was happening in Indonesia after the end of the Second World War. Those were the two biggest ones. And the third one was prepare North Borneo for some kind of independence as cheaply as possible. Britain was in financial crisis after World War II. So nearly everything they did in Borneo was designed to make Borneo more economically self-sufficient, which is not the usual thing British colonization wanted to do, but it wanted to do it in Borneo. And that's why they built the economy from almost nothing, the end of Second World War, because the Americans, as she said, flattened the cities. North Borneo Chartered Company had been probably the worst British company in history, had done almost nothing. They built an economy incredibly quickly in those years. Why? Because they wanted to make North Borneo pay for itself. If you read their reports, their main aim is, how do we make an economy big enough for them to pay the British to look after North Borneo? Because we don't have any money. And we just want to make sure that we keep out communism because of all the other political consequences. So that was this strange British period, very strange. Now, because that's not normally how the British did it. But what did that mean in Borneo? That meant that suddenly economic opportunity was coming to the kampongs, because suddenly the road were there was some kind of market, they brought education, health. It was an interesting period of expansion without much. Normally when the British colonized, they destroyed indigenous rights very quickly, but they were not doing that in this period in Borneo because they were not interested in that. They just wanted everything to be quiet. And then we get to the modern period, and I learned a lot listening to this today. I was very, very interested. If you think about who successfully, at what stage in all of this history in Borneo was there real extraction of wealth from Sabah? It was in this period, starting in the 70s. So interesting, so really interesting, different kind of economy, because all that beautiful timber, all that agricultural potential had been here all this period. And almost nothing happened until the late 70s and the 80s. So it's very interesting to link, and you asked that question about how colonization happens.
And also at that time, during the PBS years, they took out a lot of timber in Sabah because there was the state had no money. So under the, I don't know what is this, under the agreements lah, the same with water, Sabah state money comes from tourism, timber, the land, things like water under state, not federal, right? So they took out timber desperately to finance the state. There was also a lot of corruption. This is the beginning of the end of Yayasan Sabah until there's a revival, hopefully. But the reasoning was that there was no federal money. So the state had no, because all the tax goes to federal, not to state.
I don't know whether this is correlating or not, because my experience looking at the forest, now we are at the second or third cut. When I walk into many forests in Sabah, you'll find that the best trees were logged in the 80s, in the late 80s. So I'm wondering whether the late 80s is the peak time where the timber are extracted. Because now you see the second and the third cycle, those trees are not very big anymore. It's quite small. So I think looking at the tree species and all that, probably in the late 80s was peak. So I don't know whether that correlates with history or not.
The interesting thing about this period of extractive economy and this period of destruction of native rights in Sabah is that the legal mechanisms to do extraction were put here, but not used effectively because the was so useless. But all that legal framework has been very essential in this stage. The idea that everything in Sabah exists only for the purpose of economy is because you had a CEO. If you look at the whole structure of your legal code, it's about everything in Sabah is there for business.
In that same 80s period where so much timber is taken out is where that famous quote comes from. Do you want orangutan or you want gold? From Maliau Basin, right? So that there's a question that comes up, and then Sabahan people said, we want monkeys, not gold. That's a really significant moment, I think, by Sabahan people. We want Maliau Basin, not the gold.
What's the new opium?
Subsidy. That's one of the opium. It's opium. They also enslaved really. There's before I can do anything.
Tunggu.
I cannot think. Yeah.
Wait. Okay. Wait.
I'm just acting the opium.
Bantuan, subsidies. What else? Huh?
Gula-gula politik.
Yeah.
There's also the federal money. Only federal money is necessary for everything.
Yeah,
Any
subsidy
federal money.
or funding.
Other things were said. I may have forgotten. Tender. So that's connected to project.
Bantuan all together. Pangkat.
Right.
Pelantikan. Last time we have to be born under the birth, kesepian. Now you have to link the policy alliance.
Power, political. Is it political jawatan or what? Political position? Political what?
Influence.
Status?
Position.
Joe, you're addicted to high prices of oil palm. Is that what you're saying?
Then they will open more and more of their land.
Betul.
Yes.
You want to plant rice, but the price of the oil palm is higher. No more.
Do you think that maybe we're avoiding our problems?
I was saying I never thought of it like that before, that it's we tend to talk like we're a victim, right? Yeah. But I really like what Cynthia said. Are we avoiding our problems with our new addictions? Yes. So I used to think that it's about that we were disempowered, that we were victims. But maybe it's not about being disempowered and being a victim. It's something else about us, more like giving up than disempowered. I don't know exactly what the word is. Maybe somebody else can describe it better. That we're avoiding our problems, that we're not taking responsibility, or we're not being honest in addressing our problems. Something along those lines.
my ancestors are not like agricultural and all that, but they are more like white collar people, like officers and accountants. Yeah. So looking at this whole thing, I feel like one part is related to our freedom of choice. And I feel like our present right now, with all this history that happens that's behind us, is necessary for the present that we have, so that we can form better choices for ourselves in the future. Yeah. So I think it's about choices that we make with the history that we have. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. In Theory U, and many of you have gone through the Theory U training, is we call it seeing and sensing, with the knowledge of the social field, which the past has a lot to do with. And I think what Rebecca is coming from is the emergent future, because we can also see and sense based on what needs to die here, what wants to be born, and seeing and sensing with as much as we can know about where we've come from. Not hiding, not denying, not avoiding, not pretending, not silencing any of this. And what is the sense that we feel is drawing us into a future? So I think there's a lot to unpack the whole CEO and the British North Borneo Chartered Company, the trajectory that set us on. Are we managing our lands as an asset to exploit? So the worldview of that this is home and this is, we belong to this land, has been superseded. And then, we see there religion and all the other education, all the things that where we lost our wildness, where we became educated and tame, domesticated.
That's a really good word. Can you put that up there?
Which one?
We're domesticated to the federal.
Is that part of the CEO British North Borneo Chartered Company punya habit kah? Did we just continue the same pattern, manage our land by giving it to a company? And what kind of company? And then let's think about schemes. Name some schemes. Name us some schemes around various crops. Can you guys name some schemes? Think about those systems.
Message sejahtera.
Apa dia punya skema tu?
Skim tanaman sawit, tapi tanah itu diusahakan oleh pejabat daerah ke, dorang bagi kontrak kepada syarikat luar, dia bagi dalam 40-60 dengan orang komuniti lah. Tapi tidak jelas itu tanah tiada pembahagian lot di antara komuniti lah. Itu tanah tu sebulat tanah saja.
MESEJ.
Ya, message.
Bagaimana dengan communal title? Can we put there communal title? Others? What about things like Felda? Communal title, kalau kamu sign communal title, kamu dapat joint venture dengan SLDB. Betul kah? What about MPOB?
Yeah, any SLDB's communal title message contract is this saying that you are not the owner but beneficiary. Yeah, beneficiary, and then you can get revenue 60-40, and then the revenue can give to you after cost. Yeah, after cost. They build a road to your house ka apa-apa, dia tulak-tulak, in the end 1 year is a 600. That's the experience from the what happened now lah.
That's what exactly happened in Kampung Balat. They built the road, the house, and then they only give the profit after itu pembinaan punya cost tu sudah tercover lah. Itu pun dia cover sikit je, 600 satu tahun.
Which one does that fall under in the message?
Most of them.
Mana satu?
Subsidy.
Ini kah dia? Ayah.
Also, this is how people get their positions.
Jonas, what were you saying tadi? We only heard a little bit.
Ya, macam case di Agropolitan Lalampas under SLDB punya project, macam banyak isu pembayaran. Ya Kak, data Chris, betul Kak Chris?
Apa tu Chris?
Halo.
Kamu sambung?
Ya. Halo.
Ya, halo. Halo Chris.
Yang mengenai di apa nih skim SLDB di Agropolitan Lempas nih, sebenarnya kalau tengok dia punya perjanjian sebelum ini memang tidak ditepati lah. Memang jauh bisa dia punya itu skim tuh tidak bergerak dengan baik lah. Dimana setelah 10 tahun ini, orang belum konsisten bagi dia punya dividen. Sebelum ini 5 tahun yang lalu, 6 tahun yang lalu dia lebih kepada advance saja bagi pinjam kepada peserta itulah. So setakat ini pun dalam tahun 2020 tahun lalu, orang mula sudah bagi lebih kurang 101 bulan, tetapi tidak menepati syarat lah. Dalam ujung-ujung yang bulan 12 itu tidak dia bagi.
Terbaik laporan Chris. Okay, I think we lost Chris.
Can I just do a quick representation of this? So before you have the farmer and the crops, and it's their land. Now, instead, the farmers do the work on the crops, but no money gets to the farmers without going through a very large number of politicians and schemes and subsidies and federal government and state agencies and private people and contractors and then, that's what's happened. Yeah. And now these people have to go and be kind to these people to get even a small amount.
Can you repeat the things you said?
The story of Monsopiad this morning was very interesting. So as we discussed this, we were talking about how initially Monsopiad is the privileged and hero of the people. But then he took so much that at the end of the day, the villages or the kampung, the families needs to find a way so that they will catch Monsopiad while he's sleeping. So what will that be in our modern days?
Can you guys get a glimpse now of how we got into the extractive economy? And why, for example, why do we want more roads, big roads, mega dams? What is that addiction?
We cannot resist the federal money. They have promised to give, and now they're giving. So all this while, we only know how to ask. We don't know how to defend what is good and bad. So like Pan Borneo, actually we cannot imagine all the development that we say we were deprived of, the addiction that we say that we are separated. So now when they give, we don't have the tools of, just like Monsapiad, when he became the hero, we don't know how to kill him until I don't know what happened. That's why the story I was like just now actually thinking, how did the community and the family come to the point when they said, oh, he's taking too much of what we like killing other people because we want to expand the territory, or what is too dangerous for our lives. Huh? So I think at the moment, like all this big development, we compare, but we didn't keep our sort of standard of what actually it's needed for our landscape. So when other people plan for us, it's not necessarily the best thing lah. So I was actually just reflecting with Anne, when did we change from like a subsistence farmer, having everything self-sufficient, our rice. I can still imagine, I mean, remember the time when we go to the river, we get our water, although it's a lot of sweat, but everything around us is like enough for the community, enough for us. So yeah, so I think it's the 80s when suddenly road, water at least come to our village, and we started already to come back from being educated. School is there, so we don't think anymore about what is necessary, the relationship, the social relationship in our village. And I mean, no more ritual, because we think money, education, and then the belief system also altered. We didn't question a lot, so we just went through. Like now 40 years ago, 2020, that was in the early 80s or late 79, like that. So if we have this discussion now, I mean, personally, I can cry. I mean, that I think the first step to do and say, this is it. We get more people together, and so when the tears maybe feed our muscles, then we can take the steps. When Ken presented this chronology of era, I can see what happened with our people then. You know, in terms of like our ancestor, ada yang kawin, nila, they embrace the new stuff. People. I think they introduce for us how to do the talak, distill the wine, because we are very good rice farmer, abundance. So when they see that, so they teach the technology. So we sort of our ancestor got a new skill, and of course politically, I think they didn't know that this the Chinese, for instance, the British, something happened there, in the Europe and China trade, they actually push away to find, go and have trading there, and then get to this ground, to the people. So I don't know who they sent first, or who was pushed away from the lands, and or they were traded like a slave, to this area, the new land, because a bigger force want them to explore the land. And then, of course, with the CEO coming, they are more organized. They're more organized that time, and they actually know how to trade lah. In an area they were trading before, for instance, but there were nothing here. It's only forests, a lot of resources, but if you go in the water, there's already people who you cannot communicate with. And I remember maybe in the like early 90s, my mom also tell about how from Brunei or people will come and trade. And they already started trading the tamu. But then British also imposed tax. So they ukur itu kepala, how big, and then that's how much tax you have to pay. So there's a lot of revolt, yeah, ukur, and then ya, lebih besar kepala, lebih besar cukai. So I mean, when you hear the story, you can laugh because at that time I was like, if you collect the story about head, it's head hunting, it's the kepala cukai kepala, you know. So it's quite funny, interesting, but you can also get angry because people can trade very well, very good. But then at one time, you know, when maybe your product laku, then another force will come and collect taxes. And why are they collecting taxes? So it's all in terms of relationship and how they manage is really confusing lah. And then there come the relationship between the local people and the Japanese when they already married the Chinese and all. Then the Japanese came and the forced occupation. So our people want to be friend with the Japanese, but they are forcing. Yeah. So I think the consequences of, or the later part, when people want to resist, one of the complication is the domestication. So before they will have a battle, but now because they are Christianized, more educated, they will not kill the person easily. Not like mungkin the time on Sapiad time, they will just take other people's head. But this time now, or the complication, the complexity of having a religion, so it's more difficult to act. More and more difficult to act. That means the opium or the addiction is internalized. So I feel our history, even myself, I ask, oh, why did we just leave our paddy field that time? So I did some study for land use change in Penampang. They said, oh, a lot of the people went to study and then went out because of economic reason lah, education. But also, even in the early 70s, I remember, that's why most of our names are Christian. What do you call that? Yang white is like the you dream of that kind of life ba. So kalau orang putih memang mesti yang nama cantik begitu kan. So they want to go out of that. Yeah, become like that lah. Colonize lah ba itu. You don't appreciate your own standing lah. So sampai sekarang baru ada NGO kasih lagi banyak opium. Bertambah bingung kan? So we cannot do much. No lah. So we are trying to get into this lah. Trying to reflect. The community is already seeing Monsopiad very powerful. So the community is actually trying to gather the next step that they want. So I think now, for me, the story like that lah.
So those of us in the NGO community, also calling ourselves civil society, sometimes we think we're the public and we represent the public, but we don't. Are we in the same game of dividing and prolonging the polarity or the division? Does that help us raise funds from Western sources? Also dictating how those funds are spent? Just questions for us to think about. Are we telling people we are better than them? Are we nobler than everybody else? Do we have a savior complex? Are we martyrs? Is the Bumiputra right a kind of decolonization? Are you saying it's a kind of decolonization or another kind of colonization?
Like, so the reason why we have the Bumiputra right, so that we will be able to step up, to keep up, you know, so that the Bumiputra can keep up economically, culturally, you know, because we were oppressed, we were colonized. So that's why we have the Bumiputra right in our constituency. So is it a form of trying to decolonize ourselves? Does it help?
Yeah, but who was oppressed and who was colonized? I mean, if you listen to all of this and all of this, everyone was colonized, and we were just in a colonized system. So is the solution to create something the opposite? You see what I mean? Like, this happened, so we have to create the opposite situation to rebalance things. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out because that is what some of what happened, kan?
On that note of a Bumiputra, something that I've been struggling with, I hate the word orang asal. I hate the word indigenous. And I know in this context, that seems like such a strange thing to say. And I know that. I can't help, and you know that my heart is absolutely what we will call indigenous rights, orang asal. You know that about me, right? But the way that these words are used, how they've become used, to me, is another form of colonialization. And Neville said something just now. He said, divide and rule. Are we doing that again? Like, in my mind, who in this storyline is not orang asal? In a way, even with people who came from outside, we are all orang asal dari Sabah. We come from Sabah, as opposed to these gang subset grouping of you masuk club kerana this ideas now that are promoted about who is orang asal, who boleh dapat bantuan kerana dia Bumiputra, siapa tak boleh. I look like this, right? So sometimes I also feel, well, you know, who am I to say? Because I'm so mixed. But in all of this, what colonizes us to this day? What is it? Can we give it a name? Can we describe this monster? Including things that we think are on our side, like Bumiputra rights. What does NEP and all that, what is that really about? That's about a very small political class of keeping power, economic and political power, linked with Ketuanan Melayu specifically. But is it really about land rights for people who live off the land? Things like that. So I'm very confused by how the words, and I haven't even sorted it out in my mind. And I know I sound like I'm contradicting myself. And it's a problem that I'm facing that I don't know what the solution is, but I really hate the words orang asal, indigenous, and I hate the word First Nation, because naturally you will have, well, who's second nation or third nation? Or am I more First Nation than you? So already this divide and rule, this comparison, this value systems are coming from somebody who's telling you who you are. You are orang asal, therefore your values are this, therefore you have to live like this. And I just feel that it's an imposition. So I'm not comfortable with it. But I know it's a foundation of the language of a lot of the work that happens amongst all our groups. And I'm not saying it's bad. There's something in there that doesn't sit comfortably with me. And this thing, are we avoiding our problems that Cynthia said earlier, really strikes a note with me when we hide under things like orang asal rights. Is that what we're talking about? Or is there something else? And it's disguised under this kind of language, and how, I don't know if I'm making sense, but these are the kinds of problems that I'm facing in my mind on trying to decolonize or to remove myself from colonialistic language of divide and rule, of telling people who they are, of defining people. I want to be the land below the wind. I've decided I really like the definition of done line. Because I used to take offense at that because I was always done line. Now I love it because I can be whatever I want and I live in the land below the wind. I can go with the wind. I define for me who I am, not legislation. So I don't know, this is just that's why I wasn't going to bring it up just now, because it's a big one and it's not really a reflection, but it is, but it's not. And I'm confused by it. I can hear myself also using kind of prejudiced language as well. But that's where my confusion lies, in how to move forward and how to decolonize my language and how to decolonize the way I think of people. Yeah. I think that to recognize that everything about our lives and our families' lives in the past and also in the future are always multi-layered and always present. And whether it is big power, like state power, whether it is economic power, what income you have, what economic power you as an individual or a family or community may have, they're all these components in this massive web are interlinked. But we've only been here talking for a few hours. And even in that few hours, just talking it through, it's so kind of obvious on one level. And on another level, it's so complex, but on another level, it seems so clear. All we have to do is, what do we have to do? We have to recognize the web. We have to recognize the intertwined nature of our societies. We need to recognize individual power and community power, the wider family. Orang asal dari Sabah, I think, is really important, as opposed to orang asal. Orang asal dari Sabah, that have a connection to stories of the place, and also to have an understanding of political forces, economic forces. And I think once you see the matrix, it becomes easier to address the matrix and to step away from it and to make better choices for the future. And to not let other people bring in the prejudices that divide, especially in Sabah, based on the 2020 election of this tanah dan air. That to me is really important, economically, politically, socially, all of it. And it keeps coming up. It's this, something comes between, whether it's the fat stick figures that are fat, or what is it that potong jalan from something else. But yeah, seeing the matrix, making choices, stepping away from it, and then being able to make choices. Can you sum up? Because I'm also dwelling, I don't really know how to sum it up. But on one level, it seems so simple. And on another level, it seems so complicated. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan. Those of you online, you have anything before we close? I mean, they're in a way.
Just a little bit.
Go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
So just going back to all the previous commodity and crops and the reason the British came and all that. So it looks to me that Sabah, like 100 or 200 years ago, is highly dependent on crop. Everybody living in little pockets. Some are doing tobacco, some are doing getah and all over. And come another person outside with a system. So I think maybe people working in pocket in Sabah, suddenly they see that, wow, this British came with a system. And with that, they have very high regards of the British. They found that, with a system, maybe we are better, we will have this better governance, we can come together and all that. So there's a hope. But quite unfortunately, the people who control the system realize that, this is how the local people will be impressed with us. It's our system. It's our system that, gives them like hope and all that. And until today, it's the same thing. Everywhere we go, we hear about the tanah issue. And the tanah issue is governed by the system, the JTU, the Jabatan Tanah Ukur system. That is one system. Another system would be how tenders are given away. Every kampong, whenever we have a workshop, the first workshop I noticed, all these class A, class B, class C contractor, they'll be very interested to attend to see whether there's whether the peruntukan or the tender or this Forever Sabah project got any tender, got any contract. So that's the system, and we don't have any response to that system yet. The system has become so powerful, we don't have the response to that system. So that's my thought lah. Thank you.
Continue talking, continue processing, or take a break, take a walk. When we come back after dinner, we have the linear economy and the culture of patronage. So it's really kind of a continuation. So we'll have a fresh voice, although he's been also studying our history and language and all that. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes with lah.